It's time for Pure Performance.
Get your stopwatches ready. It's time for Pure Performance with Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Pure Performance. My name is Andy Grabner, and as always, I have with me my co-host, Brian Wilson. And in fact, it's funny because that's super funny, I have to say, Brian, because I just said I had nothing prepared, and that was a total mistake. I caught myself. That wasn't even a planned one. That was a complete slip up. So yes, I'm Andy. I'm Andy today. You can be Brian. You can make the dumb comments, and I'll be like the smart guy.
Yeah,
and
cool.
We'll just do some role reversal today. So you can just say "duh" a lot during the show, and
so that
I'll
means
say,
for
I
once,
have one more question and bundle 5 questions together.
Yeah. So for once, you are the smart guy in the conversation.
For once,
it's awesome.
yeah.
For once, yeah. No, but yeah. Hey, I'm happy to impersonate you, but it's hard to impersonate your accent, and you are also not doing a really good job in impersonating an Austrian accent.
I did not want to. I did not say I'm not even prepared to do it.
Yeah.
I'll go too much into Arnold if I try. So it's too cliche. It's too cliche. You know.
Hey, and I think we just heard a little chuckle, so maybe we already at least are a little bit funny to our guest. And I don't want to keep him waiting for much longer. Today, I just learned something new because I typically say Andy to every Andreas that I meet, because I always assume that Andreases in the world like the short version of it, Andy, which I do, but it's not always the case. And that's why I will keep calling Andreas. So Andreas Lehofer, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for finding time. And for those people that don't know you, who are you? What do you do? Why do you think you're on the show?
Servus, Andy.
Servus.
And I'm actually trying to help here a bit because we have so many Andreases or Andys in Austria. Very popular name for people of about our age, that it's good to have an anchor to figure out who is who.
Yeah.
So yes, I'm Andreas, and I'm Chief Product Officer at Dynatrace for the Dynatrace Core platform. And the core platform is everything about data storage and analytics, as much as a lot of other functionality that is common to everything that we are building at Dynatrace, such as reporting, dashboarding functionality.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
And I think that is related to the topic. That
it is too. It is too. It is. But because you just reminded me, you're right. Basically, Andreas is a popular name, but it's really more like in the, I guess, 70s, early 80s, right?
Yes. So now people have a clue about our age.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm not with Dynatrace since that time. I'm only with Dynatrace since early 2009, which is still a good time I've been working in different product management roles since then.
Yeah, and I think also just shows, just like I'm as long as in the company as you. Started in 2008. It just shows that we love working here, and I think the reason why I at least stay is because there's always something new and interesting coming up. We're not stopping innovating, right? And talking about innovation, Andreas, the reason why we obviously have you on the call, we have recently launched and announced, I think it was October 4th or 5th in London, Grail. So Grail is the big new thing that Dynatrace kind of brought to the world. But my real question is, and I'm sure this is also the question for many of the listeners, our customers, partners, and everybody else that looks at what Dynatrace is doing. What is Grail? Why did we build Grail? What problem does it really solve? Why do we need another storage system? Why care? I think that's something that you actually brought up earlier. The question is, why should I care that Grail is actually there?
Absolutely. This is, I think, a really important question to understand what is the value that Grail delivers to our customers. We will get a bit into what Grail is as well. This question is related with the other. But Grail is really solving two of the most crucial problems that exist in the observability and security space and around these two spaces. So the first one is what I'm frequently calling a cost value problem customers, businesses have with storing observability data and also security data. This problem is especially huge when it comes to log data, but it is not specific to log data only. To add that immediately. But with log data, I think it's the best and also the most well-known example that data is, of course, increasing exponentially. The volumes are growing. The complexity of data is growing all the time. And so is the cost of storing and analyzing log data so far. That would usually be okay, right? I mean, if the volume is increasing, then it's a normal thing that also the cost is increasing. But the problem here is that the perceived value that nowadays typical solutions are delivering to their customers is not at all proportional to the spend. And of course, that is then increasing if the data volumes are exploding. To give you a number to illustrate that, I'm asking customers or prospects whenever we are talking about this, always about what they think the percentage of data is that they are storing and never reading. And the figures that I typically get are somewhere between 90% and 95% of data. And what does that mean? That it's, of course, still there is a reason why they are storing all that data, because eventually they might need it. If you have a forensic situation, if you have to do some troubleshooting, you need that data later on. But at Ingress, you don't know what that data will be. So there is little alternative to store everything. But of course, there is a huge difference in the value that this 95% of data that are very, very infrequently analyzed, if at all, have to the 5% or 10% of data where you have to do intensive and very, very frequent analysis. So the smaller proportion of data has the high value, and the larger volume of data has very, very low value, let's say by gigabyte, which is the interesting unit. And this is one of the big problems, because today you have to pay typically by ingress a very, very high price point. And this is just not appropriate for that situation. And we have addressed this in Grail with a completely new architecture that is allowing us to be very, very efficient in ingressing, processing data at ingress, storing data, also long-time storage, short-time storage, whatever customers need, and do very, very powerful on-demand analysis if it is needed, without customers having to carry a very, very high price point on ingress when they don't know whether they will analyze the data at all. So that is like the biggest problem from a commercial point of view. There is a second problem I want to mention, and I think that let it be good then with those two, which is more from a functional perspective, from a value perspective, assuming that the first problem is solved, of course, which is that most of the solutions today are focusing on certain types of data only. So I think everybody knows a solution that is doing everything with log data, if possible. So they're looking at everything through a log lens. There are other solutions that are doing everything through a time series lens, like all the time series databases. There are very classical APM solutions still in the market that are looking at everything through traces. And this is creating silos, because you have then a set of solutions, all of them specialized into one thing. Real world use cases are typically requiring having everything, right? And if you don't have that in a single solution, it is very, very difficult. And the problem actually remains with the customer to solve it, to get then the analysis done across the silos. And a big thing, I was only mentioning the high volume data here, is also what you could consider like the glue between the volume data points, which Dynatrace calls Smartscape, the topology model, the entity model. It's very important that you are also understanding where is my data coming from. So if you have a log file, you want to know which machine, which process, which service is writing into that log file. And you want to do a join from the log data to the trace data written by that processor. If you have a time series written on a service level about, let's say you have an SLO, that I think is a great example. Typically sitting on an application or service level, you want to go from the SLO down to all the data sources that I mentioned before. And this is not possible with what is available today in the market, and was also a key requirement to us building Grail to not only solve that commercial business challenge, but to also provide customers access to all the observability, all the security data, all the also business operational data around it into a single layer that we are calling Grail now.
Yeah, I fully understand. I mean, especially the number two now. This is also the way I try to explain when people ask me, because historically, right, we as Dynatrace, we started with the APM space with traces and we stored them in an efficient way. And then we added more metrics because we went into the infrastructure, we went to real user monitoring, we went to logs, we went into security, and we obviously stored data in whatever storage was the most efficient for this type of data, but then ran into the same problem that I guess other solutions are also running into, that started maybe on, as you mentioned, on logs and then expanded to metrics and traces and so forth. So that means these data silos and then making efficient queries, getting efficient answers out of this unconnected data is very hard. So I do understand this. I have a couple of questions later, but I first would like to go back to point number one, because I want to understand one thing. You said we're optimizing the ingress because you're charged by ingress. Now my question is, how do we optimize this? Because if I have a terabyte of logs, whether I ingest it to one tool or another, what is the optimization on our end? This is what I'd like to understand.
This is going now a bit into the architecture of Grail, and I think we are good to go a bit into this. So what is happening on ingress? And this is now where things are deviating depending on what solution you're looking at. Most of the solutions that are today in the market are making use of heavy indexing at ingress, which is a very costly operation, both in CPU cost and also in terms of storage required. You need very, very expensive storage in order to maintain those indices. There is, of course, a reason why those solutions are doing that. So having those indices is making the analysis, the read type of access later on highly efficient if the search query is covered by an index, of course. If your query is, if you don't have the right indices in place, it's kind of tough luck. I mean, this is then really a problem, because then you are kind of really completely thrown back. You have to re-ingest the data and re-index and everything. But with the assumption that your indices are defined right, then the value of that index is that it makes read easy later on. But it's creating a high cost on ingress, and that is exactly now the problem that I illustrated earlier. If you think 95% of data are never read, so you are maintaining all those indices, and you have to create indices for everything that you want to do later on. You're doing that really without no reason. And we have minimum indices. There is, of course, a certain level in place for certain performance reasons. It's not that Grail takes all the data identical. There are structural differences between a log line and a time series record. And the trace span is again a bit of a different structure. And we are using those things that we do know. But the difference is we are not forcing people to define indices, and we have an analytics layer that can do every analysis that is thinkable without indices. This is where a very modern approach architecturally. It's called massive parallel processing. And then if I say massive parallel processing, think about 1,000 cores, that magnitude, right, in the Dynatrace SaaS environment. So if you run a query on the data and we don't have any shortcut, we really have to scan the data as we have it. We use very, very efficient also by economic cost hardware as it is available by the hypervisors. that gives us huge throughput, getting the data into our processing nodes. And then we have like 1,000 cores that are doing the search in parallel. And that is allowing customers to do everything they want to do on read without indices. So this is schema on read. You can pass the data that you could not pass at ingest, right? I mean, that is the other thing to say. If you think about a troubleshooting, a complicated troubleshooting scenario or a forensic scenario in the security space, it is a likely thing that you will only learn when you start researching at which data structures you really want to look at from, if you stick with that log example. And we can do that on the fly, and we are saving a lot of CPU, and we can support very, very cost-efficient hardware for data retention by not maintaining all those indices. That is actually the trick. So there is no magic in the Grail. I'm sorry about that.
No, but I think for me it is magic. But the word that that I misunderstood when we talk about ingress, for me ingress was just how much data do we need to send from the target system to the log system, in our case Grail, and a terabyte is a terabyte. But what you are basically telling me is it's the total cost of ingress, because the 1 terabyte in a traditional solution is not 1 terabyte, it's 1 terabyte plus whatever the index is, right?
Yes, in size and plus the effort to calculate and maintain that index, which is actually the most expensive thing of all. There is, of course, in Grail, like with other comparable solutions, more in the ingress than that. You can also transform data, you can filter data. We have certain PII use cases supported there. So it's a bit more than just sending the data in and storing it.
You know, I think if you come at it from the point of view of a user, it doesn't sound like anything magical. It sounds like something that would be expected, right? If we think about the magical world of computers that it's supposed to deliver, if we look at how computers are portrayed in movies, you can just use them and they do what you need them to do. And I think what's been lacking in the past is the ability for them to do what you need to do. But as you just explained, you can ask it whatever you want and don't have to think about how did we ingress it. If we take a look back to earlier, we mentioned 70s and 80s, right? I was thinking about the old text-based games, right? The text-based computer game, look left, right? And you had a certain words you can use, and it could only understand certain things that you put in. And if you wanted to say, pick up the dog, and it had it in there as canine, right? It wouldn't understand you. And now it's like, imagine a text-based game that you could type anything in and it would understand what you're doing.
Exactly. It's really bring that approach up to speed with expectations of modern users. You don't want to know all the queries ahead of time. So when you're storing data, especially. And the other thing is, I think also nobody is familiar anymore with the idea of spending a lot of time managing data retention, right? I mean, I was thinking about that. When was the last time when you two cleaned up your Outlook inboxes? Right? You don't want to think about that time. Or when did you delete data from your OneDrive? So we are not used to think that storing data is a very expensive thing. But with observability data, it is until today, and customers are spending huge amounts of money to just add that on exactly that aspect. So many of them have homegrown solutions on top of commercial log monitoring solutions for the only reason to make sure that they are filtering out data that where they think or where they guess they will not need it later on. So all of that, I think, it's a waste of time and human resources. You would do it nowhere else, right? I mean, where is the filter to delete all the unnecessary and duplicate slides from PowerPoint or such things? Completely strange, right? But in that space is common.
So first of all, thanks for explaining what we do, how we do it. I also now, I think, have a better understanding on the word ingress. I think this is where I, and maybe others as well, were kind of not understanding, because 1 terabyte is 1 terabyte. It's the total cost of storage. I have one question though, right? You mentioned a couple of keywords, like you mentioned no hydration, no indexes, schema on read, I think are some of these terms we are throwing around. Now, I got to be honest with you, and I want to challenge you on this, and I hope you give me a good answer, because I also get challenged when I talk with people and they say, well, you're not the only vendor that talks about this. There's solutions like Snowflake out there that also provide all the stuff that you claim to do on your website, on your marketing material. So why is Grail, why did we build Grail if other solutions seems to exist that also solve this type of problem?
So by the objectives that I defined earlier, we did a long research and we found no solution in the market that covers them. Mm-hmm. So if the objective is to store the data types that I mentioned in the beginning on the scale that we need and with the cost effectiveness, mm-hmm. nothing exists until today. There are solutions that are indeed going into a similar direction, which I think is also proving that we are going into the right directions with our architecture. Mm-hmm. You mentioned Snowflake. You can also look at some of the things that hypervisors are doing, like OpenSearch or Custos mm-hmm. from Microsoft. Mm-hmm. So there are certain similarities on the architectural side of the house, also certain similarities on the query language side of the house. We did not speak about the Dynatrace query language so far today. So all of this proving that it is really a modern approach what we are doing, reducing indices, supporting massive parallel processing. So there are things in common, but there are also things that are different. Just very, very briefly, both the mentioned hypervisor solutions are very, very focused on logs, so not covering the aspects that I mentioned on the functional side of the house. Snowflake is a generic database system, so it's more generic than Grail, which is great if you have those requirements, if you want to fulfill, let's say, a business use case and you want to replace your classical relational database. It's a good thing to do, and that's also why you see it adopted very, very widely, but they are not specializing into observability and security data types, which Grail is doing. And this is, of course, always a trade-off that you have in software many, many times. A very generic solution has the advantage of being more generic, but of course it's not as optimized for a bit more specialized use cases, and with the super high data volumes that we have with our customers. If you are think about a petabyte of data ingress a day, the specialization does matter from a performance and also from a cost perspective. So this is why Snowflake and Grail, this is not a direct comparison. It's a different problem that is solved.
Yeah, and I think I really like that explanation. That's also what I typically give, right? We have 15, 20 years of experience with observability data, and we know the specifics on how to treat observability data, and therefore we could optimize all of this, specifically for our use cases. And as you said, even if it's just, let's say, 10, 20, 30% more efficient than the general purpose storage solution, in a world where we have problems with efficiency, right? Where we all know the current economic climate and the challenges we have with green IT or sustainability, I think that was the right move. And it's great to see that Dynatrace decided to go down that path years ago, because it's not that we started with this last year. Right?
No.
Yeah. So this is for me the phenomenal thing, and this is why. But I wanted to challenge you because I wanted to just see what you are providing as an answer.
Absolutely, and we challenged ourselves on that one. You can trust me on that one. It was of course also a big internal discussion. If you bring up a project, hey, we are going to build such a thing on ourselves, then that question comes up automatically, and it's that question needs an answer.
Yeah, and I think where it again really comes in is the scale of environments we deal with. Right? I guess if you have a one instance WordPress somewhere running around, then there might be other solutions as well.
There is also one other additional dimension or argument that we did not yet speak about. It's not the first thing people see usually, but it's very, very important for our customers, which is also the enterprise grade of Grail as a database. So it's a multi-tenancy data store, but we have strict isolation, different encryption per tenant. We have a built-in security concept that is able to manage data access in an enterprise ready way. So these are all things that are very, very hard to find if you try to go with things that are available in the market. So at the end of the day, there was really no alternative than building it.
Cool. Hey, Andreas, you brought up the term Dynatrace Query Language. We also call it DQL.
Right.
Can you fill us in a little bit on why the DQL is also really the big part on top of Grail that will enable a lot of use cases? What's the speciality of DQL?
So it is, when it comes to accessing data that is in Grail, it's the single interface that we have. So all the data access in Grail is going through the Dynatrace Query Language. It's a new query language that we have designed to our needs and the needs, which are the needs of our customers, of course. So the focus of the design was simplicity, first of all. So it's very, very, very clean. It is also a very, very powerful language. To give you a sense for the power, we have about 150 functions in the query language as of today. So this is functionality like all the mathematical stuff that you need, statistical stuff. You can aggregate data, you can parse data. So there is a specific parsing language part of DQL that is very easy to learn, yet very, very powerful. So far away from regex, also highly performant. So really like an antagon, an antithesis to regex in many ways. And of course, it is also showing the differentiators of Grail that I mentioned before. So there's a built-in element in the language to query topological information. So you can do a query that starts with let's say, filtering log files, and then you can do a join over the topology model. Like I want to go from all the hosts that are matching where those log files are coming from over the processes to the services running, and I want to see certain spans on the service level, and you can put that into a single query language statement and do whatever you need to do.
I think one of the important things to stress with that last bit you just said there, right? How you can join across all the different elements and components. One thing that I think a lot of people take for granted is that, and I know I'm going to sound like a Dynatrace commercial here, though, is that you do not have to establish those relationships, right? That's part of the Smartscape. That's part of what we're also pulling from the other logs and other components.
Yes.
That this is all these relationships are automatically being built and maintained. And I think that's one of the most amazing pieces of this, that similar to you don't have to build the indexes, you don't have to build the relationships, which makes it just infinitely more powerful and more convenient and more, hey, it works as I expect it to work, which, under the hood is a huge feat of engineering, but to the end user, it's like it's doing what it logically should do, which...
Absolutely. And this is also from the perspective of an existing Dynatrace user. I think many of the listeners to this blog will to this podcast will understand the improvement here, because today Dynatrace has many APIs in the product. You can access all the data that is in Dynatrace. But when you're trying to do exactly what we just described, when you want to go from one type of data through the topology model that Dynatrace has built in today, and it's also, you can query the Dynatrace topology model as of today, but you have to put the pieces then together yourself as of today. And with DQL, all those limitations are removed. You can do everything in a single query, and you don't have to do things like the stitching from one storage to the other storage in your own logic. It's much easier, and customers have almost unlimited power with that query language. Whatever you want to do, if you have the data in Dynatrace, you get the answer out of Dynatrace with DQL.
That's awesome. And we have, for the folks that are listening, there are obviously different channels in Dynatrace that we use to educate our user base. I already have planned some sessions, some of my observability clinics starting in November on Grail, on log analytics, on that first use case, kind of that where we really see the power of Grail for most of our customers. So you will learn about TQL and what it can do. And also there will be more material on, I assume, Dynatrace University webinars and so on and so forth.
Let me maybe add one thing talking about DQL, because there is a chance that people will get that wrong. So no worries. Grail exists completely under the hood of Dynatrace. So you are not forced to learn DQL when you start using Grail. DQL is used internally in product. So all the views that you have in Dynatrace, all the nice things built into Dynatrace are using DQL to get the data internally. You don't have to worry about that. Only if you want to access the data in Dynatrace directly, you can use DQL. And I think there it is a strong asset. There are also other ways to access the data in Dynatrace that come without DQL. There is a classical log viewer that is just filter based and completely UI guided. There are many views in the product that allow you to select metrics and do all the common things with metrics without DQL. But I think, as everybody knows, who is has a bit of a programmer background or has used a data query language, whether it's SQL or whatever type of query language, there are certain things then where it is actually easier to use a query language than to try things that are a bit more challenging in the UI. The UI is at a point getting into the way of a more advanced user. And then you can really do everything that you want to do with DQL, but there is no force. It's not that everything is now going through DQL in Dynatrace.
Right.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. That's good, right? We have so many great features in Dynatrace that just make it extremely easy for people to navigate the data, to analyze it, and they stay the same underneath the hood. They, use obviously DQL to access the data, but great thing to know is we open it up for everyone in case you need access to the data yourself and the power of TQL. Andreas, I know it's always hard to ask a product manager for the roadmap or what's coming ahead, and I don't want you to obviously go too far out of your comfort zone because we obviously, as a public traded company, we also are only able to say so much about what's coming. But maybe you can say at least one or two things that excites you about the road ahead. As the time when this airs, I think it's going to be probably mid of November of 2022. So if you think about November and then going up, what's coming? What excites you about the next couple of months?
We have actually already been a bit into roadmap between the lines. So with the current version of Grail that is in GA, as this podcast is going live, Grail is focused on log and event data. So this is available as of today, and it's available for AWS SaaS environments. There will be upcoming releases shortly. So we are not talking about a year ahead, but more like spring 23. We will add support to the other data types that I mentioned today. To Grail, we will also add support to Azure environments, Azure SaaS environments, to Grail, and of course we will constantly improve the scalability of Grail. So there are many details that we are going to add, but I think the main thing is to understand the availability when it comes to hypervisors and also the support of different data types. And there are actually a couple of major announcements for early calendar year 23. that I can't make here
Mhm.
because we want people to join us at Perform.
Exactly.
And we have to keep a few things for us until Perform. But I can say without exaggeration that we are going to announce a few things on top of Grail that are at the same level of innovation and same magnitude than Grail itself. So a lot more to come on top of Grail.
Mm. Yeah, I think we're all looking forward to Perform, and that's a good commercial if you wanna join us. I think it's in the week of February 14th. I know this is Valentine's Day, but maybe you bring your Valentine to Vegas.
And
Right? That's a good way of doing it. We do 2 hot days, hands-on training days, and then followed by the conference. If you go to perform.dynatrace.com, you'll find all the details. Just one additional thing on a clarification perspective, in case people got this wrong. You mentioned that currently it's supporting AWS environments and then Azure is coming later. This really means that we are running Grail. We are hosting our SaaS offering on Grail in either AWS or Azure, and then Google is following as well. This does not mean our general observability support for AWS, because that's the same as it has been for years, right? If you run your own systems in Azure, in Google, in AWS, in Alibaba, in your own cloud, it doesn't matter. We got you covered. It's just that the massive parallel processing capabilities of Grail is stuff that we run in our SaaS environments. And we started with AWS, and then the other hyperscalers are following soon.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification. This is important.
Yeah. Cool. Andreas, I think it's exciting times. The observability space is obviously growing and flourishing. On the other side, it's also going to be interesting to see what's happening in the market, right? And I think with what we've been showing over the last at least 15 years that the two of us have been with the company, it seems that we have always done the right things, because otherwise we wouldn't be still here because we love it, and Dynatrace wouldn't be in the place where we are right now. So I'm pretty sure what we're doing with Grail and the next big thing that we announce, we're still on the right path.
Absolutely. As you were speaking about observability, Grail, I think, is a great opportunity to also clarify that Dynatrace has left the observability only space. We actually left it 2 years ago, but Grail is really an important element in bringing security, especially application security and observability together, right? I mean, that starts with all the data that is stored in Grail, and that is very relevant, of course, for observability, but also for security. If you think about a forensic use case where a security specialist tries to figure out if something has happened on a machine, what is the difference between such a use case and a use case of a performance expert that is trying to figure out the stability problem of an application or a performance problem of an application. It's about the same data. There is no real difference in the data. Yeah. There is also no real difference in the type of analysis that you are doing. You need full access to the data. You need this powerful ad hoc schemaless type of capabilities that we described. And so Grail is giving us the backend power, so to say, to also get Dynatrace into this type of forensic use cases. We have, this is not, I think, the time to talk about the existing support we have in Dynatrace for application security around things like vulnerability detection, runtime application protection. But it's just an example of what everybody is speaking about. Observability and security are converging markets, and I think it's always important to think about those things in parallel if you think about Dynatrace as a company going forward.
Yeah, I remember when UEM first came out, which was way. This is almost that, as big, exactly. Or even bigger than that,
UEM was then kind of integrated into observability. I think with security is so large, this is likely not going to happen.
Right.
Awesome. All right, Brian, any final thoughts from you before we wrap it up?
No, I mean, I think that, the big takeaway is that as observability was being defined, one of the flaws, or there were two flaws. You could either get a lot of your data ingested, but then you had a lot of problems using that data, accessing that data, doing something with it. Or you can get some of your data ingested, but you could do cool things with it. And yet the message was always collect all of your data and then do what you need to do with it. And what I see Grail giving the opportunity to do is do both halves of those. Get all the data in cost efficiently, and then ask of it what you want. You know, the other parallel I go to is way back when my daughter was young, she was using YouTube Kids videos, and she would, you know, speak into the microphone and say princess videos, and it would bring up a bunch of princess videos, right? And to her, she thought at 3 or 4 years old, she can click the button when she got sick of those princess videos and say different princess videos, and it should come back with a list of new ones. Obviously, it didn't because it wasn't designed for that, but it's the idea of asking for what you want and getting it, which is dependent on the data and having a flexible query capability enough to do that. And that's really what I see as the huge undertaking. Again, it's almost, I mean, it's fantastic. I don't want to underplay the fantasticness of it, but we're being given what we expect or what we should expect, which in a way doesn't seem that overwhelming. But when you look at it and say, like, but we can't do that now, that is the big, huge component. I think that's what people really just need to realize, is that, like, where else can you do this? It's amazing. I just really, really love what everyone on the product and engineering side has done. It's amazing. So thanks to everyone for that.
Cool. Hey, with this, Andreas, we may have you back maybe next year, because I know there's more stuff coming. And I think giving our listeners an update from time to time on our innovation is great. And hearing it from somebody like you that is basically leading the product initiatives here is a great way of doing this. And especially what I like is we talked a lot about Dynatrace and Grail today, but still I think we also educate people on the challenges that we're really solving. And let's hope they solve it with Dynatrace, because we built something for them. But if not, at least they're educated and they know why maybe at some point they will run into limitations with the current approach. So that's why.
Perfect.
Yeah. Dan, Brian.
All right. We will wrap it up. Thank you, Andreas, and thank you, Andy. But who am I talking to with each of those names? I don't know. Thank you for being on today. And thank you for our listeners for always listening to us and enduring Andy and I's jokes in the beginning. But anyway, if you have any questions, comments, you can tweet us at pureDT at Twitter, or email us at pureperformance@dynatrace.com. And thanks everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.